Hi, welcome to ThinkTech Asia, coming to you from Pioneer Plaza at downtown Honolulu. I'm your host, Hong Jiang, Associate Professor of Geography at University of Hawaii at Manoa. And my special guest today is Professor William Sharp from Hawaii Pacific University, and our timely topic is on Taiwan. Taiwan, a need for balance. Professor William Sharp, may I call you Bill?
Sure, please.
Is an Asia expert, and he's the author, former host of this very program, Asia in Review. Actually, he was the original host of this program from 2008 to 2012. And I'm hoping I'll gain your approval to be hosting you today.
Thank you.
So Bill's experience in Asia started in 1968, and he has expert knowledge on Vietnam, Japan, China, and Taiwan, and other places. And in addition to hosting Asia in Review show, he also wrote the Look East column on Asia for the then Honolulu Star Bulletin during 2005-2009. And this summer, he is going to teach a course at UH Manoa on contemporary Taiwan. And he's planning on going to Taiwan to do research later this month. So, currently engaged in Taiwan issues. Bill, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much.
Well, a lot is happening in Taiwan. We have this ongoing large-scale protest that really puts Taiwan on the world news, that Taiwan doesn't get the attention as much as it does before in the past. So the protests apparently initiated by the students are really targeting this trade agreement with China.
Right.
And right now, as we're talking, there are tens of thousands of students are occupying the Taiwan legislature.
Right.
Still, the protest is ongoing, tension is ongoing.
Right.
Can you help us to shed some light on, first of all, what is this agreement that students are so against?
Okay.
And what is the kind of a general mood in Taiwan in response to this agreement, the pact with China?
I think that you have to say the general mood is one of rejection. The massive numbers that are protested in front of the legislature and also in front of the executive yuan has been, how should I say, impressive. The numbers vary widely, but I think that we can say safely that just the other day there were 100,000 people demonstrating. Some people said that the number was as high as 500,000. I really don't think it was that high, but there was some suggestion that it was as high as that, at least at one point. Basically, what the services agreement does, the services agreement actually has some history. Of course, we know in 2010, China and Taiwan signed the ECFA, Economic Cooperation Framework Agreement, which sought to liberalize trade between Taiwan and mainland China. Okay, as time went on, there were other agreements signed on various issues, and those were pretty congenial, not very controversial for the most part. And now, the services agreement that comes along generally seeks to further open up both economies, which sounds good on the surface. But the problem is that it's really aimed at small businesses, small and medium-sized enterprises. Now, politically speaking in Taiwan, the small and medium-sized enterprises, folks in that particular segment of Taiwan economy feel that their interests have been generally overlooked for the favor of big companies when it comes to mainland China trade. In mainland China trade, the Taishan, the Taiwanese companies that are in the mainland, they generally represent the interests of big companies, very close to the Kuomintang. And generally it's felt that the small and medium-sized enterprises, which some people say are really the backbone of Taiwan economy, have been overlooked during the Ma era. And so this trade agreement, if passed, this services trade agreement, would open up 80 sectors on the mainland for Taiwan investment in relatively small industries like beauty salons, funeral parlors, and that sort of thing, and only 64 in Taiwan, which sounds good. in one sense. But in the other sense, there's a lot of people are saying that, you know, the small companies in Taiwan will not then be able to compete. You know, they'll be overpowered by an influx of people from mainland China, big amounts of Taiwan money, and they won't be able to keep up, you know, financially, and they'll be generally outmaneuvered. Students really take umbrage at the fact that they'll say that this will limit their job opportunities. And the unemployment rate in Taiwan right now, as I best recall, is 4.5%, which is pretty respectable in actuality. But a lot of people are concerned about that. They're worried about where their jobs will come from in the future. And I think beyond all this, you have to say the Taiwan economy is just not as robust as it once was. This year, I think it's projected to grow 2.5%, if I remember the statistics correctly. It's not like back in the day when Taiwan became known as a tiger and was growing at rates very similar to what mainland China is now growing at. So there's, beyond this, beyond the economic aspect of the trade agreement, is what kind of political influence would this trade agreement create in Taiwan?
And that
for the
definitely
mainland?
is an interesting one. From what I read in the news, the students' concerns included, you know, overpowering political influence from China.
Right.
How would that happen with this trade agreement?
Well, I think one could say that, you know, the more economic influence that the mainland gets in Taiwan, they would try to change that into political influence. Probably the mainland has really for some time really sought a peace agreement between Taiwan and the mainland, which sounds, at least on the surface, good. But what is a peace agreement? What does that really mean? As it is now, I mean, China casts a lot of influence on Taiwan. It's hard for Taiwan to maneuver in the international world because China consistently tries to clip its wings. It makes it very hard for Taiwan to to conclude trade agreements with other countries because countries that might be interested in signing trade agreements with Taiwan, if that's not to China's liking, China will put pressure on that country, usually of the economic sort.
What's interesting is that, you know, now you see this trade agreement with China and then large-scale protest. Would you say that's the largest protest in modern history of Taiwan?
Well, that's a very good question, and you know, I guess you have to depend upon, you know, police statistics, observer statistics, or estimates of what the crowds are. Now, back in 2006, and I happened to be in Taiwan at the time, there was a huge movement called the Red Shirt Movement. It was led by a gentleman, Shi Mingde. Shi Mingde is a very colorful figure, I think it's fair to say, in Taiwan politics. He spent 25 years in jail as a political prisoner in the days before Taiwan became a democracy, when martial law was the rule of the day. He was twice nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize.
Oh, wow. What was he advocating for?
He was advocating for democracy.
Okay.
And in 2006, he especially was advocating that then President Chen Shui-bian xiatai.
Oh, got it. Yeah.
In other words, you know, step down.
Step down, yeah.
Because there were pretty solid allegations cast against Chen Shui-bian and his wife and his family and some of his associates for corruption.
And that did happen later. What's interesting, moving back now, is the student protest led the protest, and it was widely supported. So I wonder whether there had been this ongoing concern about overpowering mainland influence in Taiwan that just became escalated with this trade pact.
I think people are getting more and more nervous. I think that, you know, Taiwan, as far as I can see, and I think the statistics and polling prove it out, they're not interested in unification with the mainland. This is something I think people in the mainland have trouble understanding. You know, there's that.
Why don't you want to come back to the motherland?
Yeah,
right?
Why don't you want to come back to the motherland? And you know, and Taiwan Tongbao and,
That's
and
right.
all that.
Yeah.
And share in the glory of the mainland. Well, mainland China, let's there's things to criticize about mainland China, but it's made a lot of progress. I mean, there's just no way you can say it hasn't. I mean, there are other things that definitely need attention, but it's lifted a lot of people out of poverty. I don't think I think we have to recognize that. But there's a lot of, how should we say, downside to mainland China as well. And I think people from Taiwan that go there, that visit, a number of people from Taiwan visit there, and they see what's going on in mainland China, and they make comparisons with Taiwan. Now, personally, I feel that if we compare Taiwan and China in just about every category, be it educational standards, health standards, certainly freedom, democracy, press freedom.
The environment, the air, breathable.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. Frankly, Taiwan, in my view, comes out on top. The justice system in Taiwan, every country's justice system's got some kind of problem. But, it's very interesting that a known, very famous American scholar, Jerome Cohen, he's 80-some years old, is specialized in Chinese law all his life, Chinese law, Taiwan law. He is proposing, in a book he just published, that the Taiwan legal system be used as a model for China's legal development. And I think that's pretty interesting. And frankly, in the last few months, I hope I'm not deviating here, but in the last few months, there have been some pretty big incidents in Taiwan where I think the judiciary has proven that it has matured. And that, yes, we always hear these allegations that these old dinosaur judges in the Taiwan legal system were appointed by the Kuomintang or the Nationalist Party in its heyday, and they have yet to retire. But, and undoubtedly there's some of those folks around. But it seems to me the courts have acted in a pretty responsible way in some pretty contentious legal situations as of late.
Are you indicating the connection between the maturity of the Taiwanese judicial system and the current protest? That do maybe people feel more protected by the process?
Oh, that's a really good question.
And then, because I see students are really calling for nonviolence,
right? And
they're well organized.
They're very well organized. They're very motivated.
Yeah.
And very articulate.
So in a way, that it's indication of a Taiwanese democracy and judicial process is working. That they are.
I think that's true. I think I'm. Maybe it's the American thing, but I'm really so glad to see this democracy evolving, and it certainly is. And some people criticize Taiwan sometimes. Well, people in the legislature, they fight, they beat each other up.
I know, it's quite a scene.
It's quite a scene, but if you think about it, in the United States, when the United States started off, there were the same kind of things. I remember visiting Independence Hall in Philadelphia, I forget how many years ago, 6 or 7 years ago, and having a guided tour through there led by a park ranger and say, yes, and right over here is the spot where Senator so-and-so, when they were drafting either the Constitution or the Declaration, I forget which, almost killed this other would-be senator.
That's interesting.
And on the floor of the U.S. Capitol, in Washington, D.C., there were at least one incident when one senator nearly beat to death another senator with a cane. So, and Japan, during the 50s, in the occupation, there were lots of fights on the floor of the Japanese Diet. And certainly Korea has had its own bout with this sort of issue. So it's a process of political maturity.
It's almost like political coming of age.
Right.
Fight first.
I'm thinking that, let's face it, Taiwan democracy is not that old, just since 1987, 1988. It seems to me that it's crossed some pretty big bridges here. I mean, we had a couple incidents in Taiwan last summer before all this services trade agreement issue erupted, where there was also some large demonstrations. It seems to me democracy held. I was at one point fearful maybe maybe the system will somehow collapse under all this protest, but it doesn't seem to be the case. I mean, people in Taiwan work very hard for their democracy. As a student in Taiwan in the early 1970s studying Chinese, I remember the power that the authorities had. I remember the political prisons, there are a lot of political prisons in Taiwan. Luckily, those are now museums.
That's interesting.
Yeah. On Green Island, which is a small offshore island off the southeastern tip of Taiwan, there's a very famous political prison there that today is a museum.
Yeah. Well, Taiwan has gone a long way.
Yeah, and I'm just afraid that we don't give it credit for all the advances economically and politically that it meant. It's you know, people. It's unfortunate that in this country a lot of people don't seem to know the difference between Taiwan and Thailand. And it's sort of shameful, but it's true.
That's right.
And on the other hand, I'm not sure that Taiwan has done a really good job in promoting itself, and then the world knows about it.
Well, maybe now it's an opportunity because everybody's eyes on Taiwan and see what's going to happen with this protest that's ongoing. So let's take a short break, and toward the very end of the show, I want to have you gave us a prediction of what's going to happen with this standoff right now. So this is a Think Tank Asia. I'm your host, Hong Jiang, and we'll be speaking about Taiwan, a need for balance. We'll be right back after this short break.
Castle and Cook, Hawaii. Investing in Hawaii, creating communities, and providing for the needs of our state. Collateral Analytics, empowering the real estate industry to make better informed property investment decisions. The Foreign Trade Zone, bringing the benefits of the Foreign Trade Zone programs to Hawaii businesses and entrepreneurs. Galen Ho, a senior executive of BAE Systems, a global defense, security, and aerospace company. Hawaiian Electric Company and its affiliates Maui Electric and Hawaii Electric Light Company on Hawaii Island. The Hawaii Energy Policy Forum, incorporating diverse perspectives to design a flexible and forward-looking energy strategy. Hawaii Energy, the state's energy and efficiency program created to help Hawaii's residents and businesses adopt a clean energy lifestyle. Hawaii Gas, helping Hawaii achieve its transition to clean energy and a better energy future. Hawaii Pacific Health, bringing technology and teamwork together to transform healthcare in Hawaii. The High Tech Development Corporation, attached to DBED, is the state's leading technology agency. The Scheidler Family Foundation, supporting educational, cultural, and charitable organizations, including Think Tank.
We're back, we're live, and this is Think Tank Asia, and we've been speaking with Professor William Sharp about Taiwan, a need for balance, speaking from the ongoing protest in Taiwan against the service pact with China. So in terms of the protesters, they mostly the supporters of the other party, which is a Democratic Progressive Party, all are people from the Kuomintang party also are against this service pact.
Well, I'm sure there's some people in the Kuomintang that are against it, although they might not be out there protesting so loudly. But I do think that, you know, I think that you've seen in recent months that in one sense there's sort of a, how should we say, a bipartisan view evolving to some degree that maybe we're becoming just a little too dependent on China, you know, and this doesn't seem to be a reversible trend. They say, well, in the ECFA, there's escape clauses, and we can get out of this if we want to, but one really begins to wonder, especially when it's big business, big Taiwan business that's driving this. And I think it's fair to say the Kuomintang gets its campaign monies, you know, at least in part, from the big companies. The big companies, at least in recent elections, have not been that supportive of the DPP. Yeah, but to go back to your question, do these folks, which party do they support? I'm not sure they particularly support any party, to tell you the truth. I think that you can see in Taiwan and this was very clear in recent elections, a very significant block of swing voters.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and these tend to be, as far as I can see, younger people. They're not particularly enamored of any party.
Okay.
They're looking out for their future. And this is a very significant force in Taiwan politics these days. And actually, I think if you look at other democracies in Asia, if you look at Japan, if you look at South Korea, as I see it, this concept of swing voters is also beginning to become more prevalent in those countries. And it's something that election strategists, campaigning strategists, regardless of whether they're Japanese, South Korean, or Taiwanese, have to keep more clearly in mind. Now, it is true that as these students were out protesting, they took over the legislative yuan, the legislature, and they also took over the executive yuan, where the premier has his office. They were forcibly ejected from the executive yuan, and there was, I really don't like to say it, probably some policemen that got a little bit out of control. They have not exercised that sort of eviction, power of eviction from the legislature. They're still there. I think, I don't see these folks being particularly party-oriented, although the DPP is certainly out there cheering them on.
Yeah. No, it's because of because it's protesting against this current, power that's represented by President Ma, who's the Kuomintang.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think it has to be said that generally the students' interests seem to parallel the DPPs more than the Kuomintangs. But the students don't seem to want to fall into anybody's clutches.
They wanted to be the independent thinkers.
Yeah.
That's making this political process much more interesting, because now you have to really see what your policies are, not just which party you belong to.
If we look at Taiwan history, if we look at Chinese history, actually if we look at, like political history in Japan and South Korea, it's student protesters have such power. They have sort of a moral stamp of authority,
Well, if you look at China, people are still talking about the 1989 student protest.
Right.
And since then, right now, the largest protest I see is from Taiwan.
Yeah, that's true. And I think that if people in Taiwan, they obviously know about China. They know about like the May 4th movement. That's a kind of a model for them in a way.
That's right, yeah.
That's a kind of a model for them.
Yeah, coming back to these two parties, the Kuomintang, the DPP, these are the two major parties that have the most power. There's some smaller parties, only like, very few representatives there.
Well, there's another party called the Taiwan Solidarity Union that often aligns with the DPP.
Okay.
The DPP is in the process of rethinking its China policy. Now, the DPP, for some time, was its main issue was Taiwan independence, and they realized that there are certain barriers, fairly formidable barriers, that will not let them realize that goal. The United States does not support Taiwan independence. The U.S. government, as best I read it, supports the status quo.
That's right, yeah.
And certainly China does not support Taiwan independence at all. And in fact has threatened to attack Taiwan if it should declare independence. So, within this, having realized this, I think you've seen in recent months, the last year or so, maybe a little bit longer, the DPP, certain key leaders in the DPP have sought to, how should we say, put this concept of Taiwan independence on ice, to sort of like to freeze it, or even to relegate its importance in the overall party platform. The DPP wants to get back in power. And they realize that if they push the Taiwan independence too much, that's going to alienate people, because it creates questions. What will China do?
That's
What
right,
will the economic and political fallout be? If we're independent, are things going to be all that much different than they are now? Aren't we
That's
really
right.
independent
Yeah,
as it is? I mean, okay, it seems okay. We only have diplomatic relations with 23 countries, but in essence, we have economic relations with everybody. We'd like to make those better, but at least we have those. Is independence really going to be that much better than what we have now? Or maybe it'll be a step backwards. Who knows?
Yeah.
And so you see the DPP trying to craft some sort of coherent China policy, which essentially keeps the United States happy, keeps China happy, and allows
and get the voters basically.
and get to voters.
Yeah.
And it's difficult because it's unfortunate. I think that the history of the DPP has been one of somewhat factionalism. It's sort of an amalgamation of different factional interests kind of thrown together as one party. Yet, in the Kuomintang, I think, see suggestions where it's becoming more fractured than it was. Certainly, President Ma's attempt to throw Wang Jinping out of the party, out of the speakership, did not gain him a lot of votes. In fact, one of the most pro-mainland Kuomintang leader, Lin Zhan, told Ma that what you're trying to do to Wang Jinping when this was happening is really pretty foolish.
So if you can explain a little bit to our viewers, this President Ma and Wang Jinping, what was going on there? That was right before the student protest that kind of partly led to the protest.
That's a very good observation, yeah. Well, last summer, in the fall, I guess, I might be going back just a little too far, this services trade agreement first came up. And essentially what President Ma wanted was for Wang Jinping as the legislative president, to use his English title. It wanted him to essentially make sure that this got passed as expeditiously as possible with as little friction
review
as possible, a little review as possible. Wang Jinping realized that, we can't do that. Personally, I think, and I've heard other people say, that Wang Jinping is one of the shrewdest political figures in Taiwan. He's very clever. He's got friends everywhere. He's got so many friends. Frankly speaking, he's got a lot more friends than Ma. Ma's a little short on friends right now. And I think anybody would follows Taiwan politics would agree with that. I don't think that's an overstatement on my behalf. So there was a lot of consternation. Now, Wang Jinping has a very good working relationship with the DPP in the legislature. And although the DPP is the minority party, the opposition party, it uses its power to the best as well as it can. Okay, now there's actually two things that came together. One was the leader of the DPP caucus wanted Wang Jinping to use his influence in a situation, and he asked him to talk to the Minister of Justice and see if this court decision might be against the leader of the opposition might somehow be weakened or at least reviewed. Wang Jinping called the Justice Minister and asked him if he could review it. I personally don't really see anything wrong with that. I mean, just saying, hey, can you review it? Maybe there's something wrong here. Okay. At the same time, this was in the background. As I mentioned before, President Ma was trying to get this trade services agreement essentially rammed through the legislature. Well, Wang Jinping said, no, we can't do that. We got to talk to the other side. We got to try to get some kind of consensus out of this. The other side wanted to review each item. in this agreement, item by item by item. They want to do this in committee.
And then that's what the students are calling for.
And
item by item
yeah, exactly.
review. Yeah.
Exactly. So, like I said, there's a history here. And so what happens is President Mao became furious that Wang Jinping wasn't pushing this thing through. So he said, well, you know what? You're really acting in a very irresponsible, and I think the suggestion is corrupt manner by trying to use your influence to get the justice minister to review this case. Ultimately, the justice minister had to resign. President Ma said that, you know, this was the most shameful day in the life of Taiwan democracy, and he was essentially trying to kick Wang Jinping out of the party, and certainly wanted to see him lose his speakership. Well, as they said, Wang Jinping's got friends, and he's a savvy player.
So he took the case to the court.
He went to court, and guess what? He won.
Okay.
And then after that, I think people who Ma will listen to told him, drop it, drop it.
Yeah.
This is not going anyplace. It's also said that one of his key advisors, Jin Putsong, who is the, at least up until right now, has been the de facto Taiwan ambassador in Washington, and one of Mao's alter egos. He was in Washington, Mao's in Taiwan. If Jin Putsong had been in Taiwan, then he probably would persuade Mao not to do this in the very first case.
He didn't have a wise advisor with him at that time.
Right, he did not have a wise advisor. So, okay, so this sets up this background of consternation. So Ma is...
But Ma still pushed this through.
Yeah,
even with all that background.
He sort of let his guard down for a while, laid low for a while, and then he started to push it through again. Okay, now the students are not necessarily against this agreement, but what they say, it's got to be reviewed item by item. There's got to be a mechanism set up that will scrutinize all future agreements with the mainland. And they're even talking about a referendum on this trade agreement, a nationwide referendum. Referendums, the suggestions of referendum in Taiwan are always very tricky, sensitive issues. Because frankly, the mainland is very weary, very leery of referendums, because they seem to think somehow they might be transformed into a independence referendum. I believe the U.S. government is a little bit leery of them too. And they have been suggested in the past by other, Chen Shui-bian when he was president, in a way that annoyed both China and America. But, you know, in a way, okay, you want a trade agreement, you want public support, maybe there should be a referendum. But it does.
So we don't know what's going to happen with the service pack at this time, and the student concern, if I want to kind of sum it up at this point, is there's a lack of a democratic process.
A lack of transparency.
Lack of transparency, as well as a concern for too much influence from China.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true.
Okay, so let's take another short break. This is Asia in Review at Think Tech Hawaii, and I'm your host, Hong Jiang, and we'll be speaking about the issue with Taiwan, a need for balance. We'll be right back after this short break.
Aloha, I'm Nicole Horry for Think Tech. For nearly half a century, the Hawaii Foreign Trade Zone No. 9 has brought the benefits of the Foreign Trade Zone program to Hawaii businesses and entrepreneurs. DBET, the Department of Business, Economic Development, and Tourism, operates Hawaii's Foreign Trade Zone program to encourage international business and economic development. The Foreign Trade Zone's mission is to increase the amount of international trading activity in Hawaii, thereby providing employment opportunities for the residents of our island state. For more information, see ftz9.org. I'm Nicole Horry. Mahalo.
Hi, we're back. We're live. This is Think Tech Asia, and I'm your host, Hong Jiang. And we've been speaking with Professor William Sharp about Taiwan, a need for balance. So, right before the break, we talk about the process right before the student protest. that led to the students' concern that also is echoed by so many people in the Taiwanese society
Right.
about lack of transparency and also too much of a China influence.
Right.
I was just reading this article by Bloomberg. It's titled, "Is China Losing Taiwan?" It opens with Taiwan's Ma Ying-jeou is learning a very valuable lesson the hard way. If he wants to cozy up to China, it's best not to be too Chinese about it. So talking about the...
I read that article too. I think Bloomberg has had some real good pieces, very comprehensive stories on this situation in Taiwan. I've been pretty impressed with the Bloomberg reporting.
Yeah, so it's really interesting to see that. And the title of this show is Taiwan, A Need for Balance.
Right.
Can you explain that?
Well, I think we suggested, or I suggested a number of times already in the show, I think people in Taiwan, I think this is part of the consternation, is they realize they're getting just too dependent on China.
Yeah.
And with that dependence, it's not only economic dependence, but it also infringes on political aspects of life. And Taiwan has worked so hard to achieve, the economic results, the achievements that it's gained, as well as its democratic advances, and they don't want to lose that. Yeah, the democracy part I think is really important. I'm beginning to see more people in Taiwan say, well, yeah, okay, money is nice, but democracy is more important.
Mm-hmm. And I've seen Taiwanese scholars who call, for those who are calling for unity, are talking about, well, democracy first, meaning mainland China democracy first,
right,
and then talk about the unity of Taiwan and mainland. Yeah.
See, I think that democracy in China, I believe, is a long way away for all kinds of reasons. Mm-hmm. But I agree with you that I've seen that, I heard that. People told me face to face, yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, if China becomes democratic, then maybe we could talk about some kind of unification, but not until that point.
And I also wonder what's happening to Hong Kong is also making Taiwanese people very concerned.
That's a very good point, because as there were these, depending on whose statistics you want to read, or whose estimates you believe, whether it was 100,000 or 500,000 people protesting, there was also a protest in Hong Kong, 1,000 people supporting those folks in Taiwan. Mm. And I think, I'm not sure that the mainland has handled Hong Kong correctly. I mean,
they're meddling in the politics more and more in recent years. Yeah.
It's a very sophisticated population in Hong Kong and very savvy. They expected at the time that Hong Kong returned to the mainland that there would be direct election of the chief administrator. Mm-hmm. And now that has been highly manipulated by China. And if they have any kind of open election, it's only the people standing for office are going to be only those stamped, approved by the Chinese Communist Party.
That's right.
There seems to me there's more flooding of Hong Kong with Chinese. And, this is the thing China does. Whenever it has any kind, it doesn't matter if it's Xinjiang or it's Tibet or it's Inner Mongolia or it's Hong Kong or it's Macau. And with these areas that China is not completely secure about, it tries to flood them with Han Chinese. Mm-hmm. It says, oh, if you go to Xinjiang, you'll make all this money and there'll be all these benefits. And if you go to Tibet, there'll be all these benefits and you can do this and you can do that. And they try to pump up the proportion of Han Chinese in the population relative to the indigenous people. And that's all because of it's a way to gain political claws into that society. And they're doing it in Hong Kong. I'm clearly doing it in Macau. And I think you can see their strategy unfolding in Taiwan. Well, we'll get those people in there with businesses. There's already a lot of mainland Chinese students in Taiwan, because, and I'm not sure that that's a really good thing. You could argue on one hand, oh, that's good because the mainland students will see Taiwan, they'll take those lessons back to the mainland. Or maybe they're just going to stay in Taiwan, but in their hearts, it'll always be from the mainland, right?
Yeah, yeah. I've seen stories coming in from Taiwan about how these Chinese people in Taiwan are gaining their influence in the society and exporting to Taiwan the mainland Chinese way politically. So that's also, I understand that's causing concern for people in Taiwan.
There was concern that that the way this issue has been handled reflected too much of a sort of a mainland style.
Too much mainland style. That's right. But coming back to the balance issue, it's also Taiwan is in a kind of a tricky situation trying to balance because I understand they try to maintain their integrity, especially politically and territorially. But then this big China, right, hovering against right at the neighbor across the strait.
Taiwan's in a very difficult position. I think to be a Taiwan diplomat, to be a Taiwan military officer is probably frustrating a lot of the time because, China seeks to isolate Taiwan. It seeks to limit the number of modern weapons that are exported to Taiwan. Taiwan's room to maneuver on the international stage is somewhat limited. It's all because of Chinese influence. And on the other hand, I think that some other countries, democracies, have to stand up for Taiwan a little bit more than perhaps they have in the past. And there's so many countries and to be really frank with you, I'm a little bit disappointed with South Korea. Because South Korea and Taiwan were so close for so long. And now South Korea has essentially dropped Taiwan like a hot potato. And in order
to build
pressured
by mainland China.
Yeah, to build. Well, I think there's two things. It's pressured by mainland China on one hand. It's also pressured by the chaebol, or the big economic interest in South Korea, who see China as being the new El Dorado. But the truth of the matter is that I think it's a bit foolish of the South Koreans in some ways, is because, they wanted a good relationship with China, not only for economics, but because they thought it could be a lever to use against North Korea. Has that worked out? No.
I see.
North Korea sunk the South Korean frigate, the Chonan, a couple years ago. China didn't say one thing. Does China have any influence, or has it used influence to somehow limit the shenanigans of North Korea? No. How about this land that both Koreas claim on the border between China and North Korea? This land, which was once part of Korea, the Koryo dynasty, and is now controlled by China. If they're so friendly with either Korea, why haven't they given that land back? I think you also can see that that maybe Korean business in China hasn't panned out quite as fruitfully as they had hoped. But on the other hand, Korean companies have definitely made money there. I remember a few years ago in Taiwan, I think it was I was there in 2011, there was a big op-ed piece in one of the papers. It was written by the de facto South Korean ambassador saying, hey, really, South Korea should have a much better relationship with Taiwan. Yes, you guys are competitors economically, but also you share an awful lot of similarities. They both were very authoritarian societies, both were very poor. They both became rich. They both became really vibrant democracies.
That's right,
so many countries around the world will spurn Taiwan in hopes that it will increase the benefits they gain with a relationship with China. And I know, to me, it seems to be quite unfair. Yet, on the other hand, I will say, too, that I sometimes think that Taiwan itself is sometimes a little bit wary about annoying the mainland.
Definitely, even the Taiwanese people here in Honolulu, I've met personally, and they express that kind of concern that the Taiwanese government and people really don't have a lot of kind of power against to stand up against the Chinese aggression there, just because they feel like they just are not strong enough.
Yeah.
So it's really a tricky situation, and it is. I agree with you that it's an international issue, not just Taiwan's own issue. Because
I really think democracies have to stand up for Taiwan more. I think Taiwan has to sell its story more. Taiwan's got a great story, but it just doesn't sell it very well.
That's also, I think, overshadowed by the Chinese story.
Absolutely.
That all this soft power expansion from mainland China really put Taiwan in a kind of a dark shadow there. People don't really know much about Taiwan.
That's true. That's really true. Like as we were saying before the show, it's very unfortunate in this country that a lot of people just really don't know the difference between Thailand and Taiwan.
Coming back to this protest, we just have a few minutes left.
Okay.
What do you predict? What's going to happen now? The students are still occupying the legislature.
Okay, I'm going to give you a two-part answer to your one-part question.
Okay.
How about that?
Yeah.
Okay, I think the Ma would be wise just to drop this. Stop pushing like this, because he's only going to stir up more chagrin. Okay? Why does he want to push it so much? Does he feel that somehow he's building a legacy, that he'll get this special invitation to meet Xi Jinping in Shanghai or Singapore or someplace? I think it would be wiser for him and his own party just to drop this, stop pushing so hard. Okay, you got to think about the elections that are coming up.
Okay.
And right now, I don't think your party is in a particularly envious position relative to certainly the 7-in-1 election, and perhaps further down the road the presidential election.
He did come out to speak to the students that I watched, and he was appealing to the students that we are going to review it, but he didn't. He said he's not going to drop it.
Yeah, I know. He's being very hard-nosed about it. I'm really not sure that that's the wise thing to do. There's only going to be more. I would suggest there's probably only going to be more dismay and even more demonstration. If there isn't, people's memories are long, right?
That's right.
Don't forget.
Is there any chance of him sending the police to come in and evict the students and became more violent? Students were calling for peace.
Yeah. The students have been ejected from the executive yuan. They're still holding the legislature. And how the students are dealt with there is rest on the shoulders of Xi Jinping.
Okay.
A friend of mine, he does some writing for, I had it here someplace, what happened? He writes for Forbes, and he was suggesting that, lost that. He was suggesting that probably Xi Jinping will kind of try to work out some kind of peaceful way with the demonstrators that leave the legislature. Okay. And maybe even if it's only to carry to stage their demonstration from a different area than the legislature. He doesn't think that Xi Jinping would send the police in. I think that would be bad.
Okay. Well, I hope they wouldn't. I hope they are wise enough to resolve it by just dropping the service track.
I think that would certainly be in their interest. I think. You know what's very interesting is Kuomintang. There's this gentleman named Eric Chu. He now is the mayor of, they call it Xinbei, right? Xin Taipei, or this they call it Xinbei. And he is said to be the leading Kuomintang candidate for the presidential nomination in 2016. Nobody sees him. He's hiding. He knows that this is a turmoil. He knows this could be greatly harm his chances of being elected. Nobody knows. He's hiding.
Well, he should be talking to the president now, Mao, to say, well, drop it.
Yeah, he's keeping a really low profile, Oh, here's the piece I was looking for. Yeah, this is written by a friend of mine named Ralph Jennings. He's a longtime journalist that lives in Taiwan. He also was a journalist on the mainland for some years. And he's saying he has 3 ideas of how this might end. One is the police force everyone out. The other is students leave by attrition. They just plain get tired of it.
Yeah.
The other is that they work out a deal with the legislatures, and I think that means Xi Jinping, and they sort of carry the protest on, but another place let the leave hang and go back to work. But what do they want? I mean, what they want is reasonable. We want to review this agreement item by item. We want a mechanism to review all future agreements with Vietnam. They're not saying stop all future agreements with Vietnam.
Right.
We want an open, transparent policy. We want democracy.
Well, let's hope the last scenario will win the day, and there will be a peaceful agreement allowing Taiwan to move forward with a positive kind of direction.
Right.
And thank you so much for coming here and educate us about what's happening in Taiwan.
You're quite welcome.
Again, we're out of time. We have to wrap up. And I'm Hong Jiang. This is Think Tech Asia, and we've been speaking with Professor William Sharp from Hawaii Pacific University, and we've been talking about Taiwan, a need for balance. I want to thank all of you for tuning in. I'll see you next Tuesday at Think Tech Asia. Thank you and goodbye.